Hi and welcome to the sew along video. So this is a knit garment, so we're going to be using our overlocker. So when you're ready, set your overlocker up with 4 threads of colour that match your fabric, and make sure your stitch width is set to 6mm, which is 1/4 inch. Our overlocker is only going to be used to sew our fabric together. Because we have a 6mm seam allowance, we're not going to cut any extra fabric off as we sew. In addition to our overlocker, you're going to need a plain stitch on a sewing machine. So it's a good idea to test stitch before you start, because you'll need to set your stitch length longer than normal. Also put a ball needle in your machine. The ball needle will make sure that the fibres, yarns, the threads of our fabric won't be cut as we sew and cause a run or a ladder. So the other thing I'd like to mention about this garment, it's designed to be sewn with 2 colours. So that means you can either use 2 sets of overlocking thread, or if you're just going to use 1 set of overlocking thread for the entire garment, make sure you test stitch your 2 colours together with scrap fabric first to make sure that you're really happy with the colour choice before you begin. So when you're ready, let's get started. I'm going to start by sewing the sleeves together. So you'll need to find your upper sleeve and your lower sleeve. Now when we look at the sleeves, you'll see that there's a notch at the very top of the centre, which is the crown notch, and then on one side you'll see 2 notches together. So the double notch shows us the back of the sleeve, and then clearly the other side of the sleeve is the front. So I have a pair of sleeves, and some people call it 2 mirrors. So I've cut one this way, and then I've turned the pattern over and cut one like that. So it's very important, especially when sewing knit fabrics, that we sew right sides together. So what I'm going to do is place both of these right side up, and then I'm going to take my lower sleeve, and you'll notice that it's longer at one edge than the other, and at the long edge there's a notch in the centre. So what I'm going to do now is place that long edge to the lower part of the upper sleeve and repeat it on the other side. So now we have our upper and lower sleeve right sides together. I'm going to match the straight seam, and at the very centre you'll find a notch. So what we need to do is overlock this together, making sure our centre notches match. Okay, so when you've done this one sleeve, go ahead and repeat that on the other sleeve. Now if we come to the lower edge of the sleeve, what you're going to see is notches. So these notches are going to show us, the one closest to the lower edge is going to show us the turn position for our hem. The next notch and the third notch is going to show us where our thumb's going to come out. So what we need to do now is seal this seam off so we can sew it later. So what I'd like you to do is overlock up this edge to about 1 inch past the third notch, and then just run your overlocker off. Also, if you don't have access to a cover stitcher, it's a good idea now to overlock the hem in as well. So I'm going to do all 3 at once. So I'm going to start about 1 inch or 2 or 3 centimetres above the highest notch there, and make sure when you overlock that you can still see your notches through the overlocking. Okay, so now put that one somewhere safe and go ahead and repeat on the other sleeve. So we're going to work at creating our back. So you're going to have two back pieces, a lower back and an upper back. So this is the yoke piece. We're going to create a pleat at the center of the lower back piece. So take the lower back piece and come to the upper edge. Now you'll know it's the upper edge because there'll be 4 notches through the center, and as well as that, the upper part is narrower than the lower part. So if you open this up right sides together, you're going to see 4 notches along the center. Now for argument's sake, let's just label them notch 1, 2, 3 and 4, and this is right side up. So we're going to create a box pleat. So what we're going to do is come to notch 2, so right side up, 1, 2. Take notch 2, create a fold and put it on top of notch 1, and I'm going to place a pin within the seam allowance just to hold that into place. Here's notch 3 and notch 4. So take notch 4 and place it underneath so that notch 3 is on top, and place a pin in to hold that into position. So we've just created a box pleat through the centre back of our garment. Now if we look at the yoke piece, there's a notch approximately here, and that notch there, one of them will match to this side of the pleat and the other will match to this side of the pleat. So take your yoke piece and place it so that we have right sides together. And I'm going to start by putting my notch towards the side of our box pleat here, and I'll pop another pin in it here, and then our other notch to the other side of our box pleat. And I'm just going to take out those pins I had underneath. Now if you wanted to, of course, you could just sew a line of tacking stitches in that pleat before you go any further. Certainly a good idea too. You can just do that with your plain sewing machine. So now we're going to sew the seam together. So I'm just going to make sure, just double check your right sides are together, and I'm going to sew this so that my pleat is on top because I find it a little easier to manipulate. So we're going to start by matching the side seam and overlock. Alright, so I'm coming up to my pleat position here. And what I'm going to do is just make sure it's all really tidy. I'm going to take out the pin. Remember, we never overlock over our pins. And I'm just going to double check that that pleat is all sitting perfectly on top of that notch. And we're going to go that far. And what you can see here is as I've gone, I've created a perpendicular line, so a right angle line here with my machine. So that will just make sure that that pleat sits nicely when it's being worn, when the garment's being worn on the body. And I'm going to take my other pin out now, making sure my pleat is all perfectly aligned, and it can come undone. So really my pins are just there to temporarily help me put everything into position. Sometimes it's easier to use a pair of long nose tweezers when you're doing this. So I'm just going to line that up again nice and perpendicular and make sure that that runs underneath my machine foot nice and smoothly before I continue overlocking. There we are. And then just overlock to the other edge and off. So it's a good idea now to go ahead and press that, and we'll move on. So now we're going to sew the shoulders together. So take the back piece you just created and hold it right side up, and then we're going to place the front in the correct position right side down. So the main thing to be aware of is to make sure you pin the right shoulders together. And how will you know that? Well, the easiest way to work it out is that you can see the armhole curves. So make sure that those armhole curves are in the same way and that our fabric is right sides together. So I'm just going to pin that together to hold it, and then I'm going to come across to the other shoulder and take my other front piece and make sure that's right sides together and pin that. And now I'm going to overlock both of the shoulders. So now we're going to sew our sleeves into position. So take one of the sleeves and then match that to our garment armhole, making sure that the double notches match. So this is the front, this is the back, here is my sleeve. So this is, sorry about this fabric is so slippery and rolly, and it's a freezing cold day in my workroom today, so I'm all butterfingers. So let's try this again. Right side up, here is the front armhole, here is the back yoke, the back armhole area, and here is one of my sleeves, and I'm going to place it right side down. Now you can see the double notch there faces towards the front, so this is the wrong sleeve. So make sure that you match the correct sleeve to the correct armhole, and it's really easy to get it wrong. If you get it wrong, your sleeve won't sit properly on the body. So let's try this for the other side. Here is it, right side up. Here is my back yoke and the double notches, and here is the front. So here is my sleeve, right side down. So we have right sides together, and there my double notches will match. So take that crown notch that we mentioned earlier, match that to the shoulder, hold that in place. Match the double notches together, hold that in place, and now we're going to overlock this in from armhole to armhole. Generally you'll find it easier if the sleeve is on top, but it's entirely up to you. So what I'm going to do is just overlock a short distance and that will hold my work into place. And now we need to make sure we ease out the sleeve into the armhole, remembering the sleeve piece is larger than the armhole we're sewing it into. Once you reach the crown notch, we need to make sure that the ease is distributed evenly between the crown notch and the double notch. And if you can, it's a really good idea to try and sew in one continuous line from here until you get to the double notch before you rearrange your work. Okay, so go ahead now and put the sleeve into the other armhole. Right, so now let's move on to sewing the side seam, and so this is going to include the thumb hole notch. So we're going to start by coming to the lower edge of the sleeve piece here, the part that we overlocked earlier. So right sides together, fold this like so. So as I mentioned before, as we come up the side seam, we have notches. So the lowest notch is our hem position, and then between the second and third notches, that is where our thumb hole is going to be. Now what I'd like you to do is we need to overlock, and we're going to reinforce this with our plain sewing machine, but what we're going to do is overlock from the bottom here past the first notch, and we need to come off just before the second notch. Then we're going to leave a gap to the third notch and start overlocking again just after the third notch and continue up the side seam. Now when we continue up the side seam, we need to make sure our join position matches here, and then we're going to make sure our underarm position matches. So let's just go that far. Okay, so here's our underarm seam here. Make sure when you overlock it that that is directly on top of each other. And we're going to turn through now and come through the body of the garment. So as we come through the body of the garment, there are also going to be notches that we match as we go down. So go ahead and sew this all the way through to the body hemline. Right, so now go ahead and repeat that again for the other side. Okay, so now we need to move across to our plain stitcher to sew the thumb hole area into place. So come to your plain stitcher, and what we need to do now is create a nice area for our thumb hole to go through. So we're going to run a line of stitching just to the side of our overlocking, and we want to stop and back tack just opposite our notch here. Hopefully your overlocking has run off before the notch. And then we're going to cut the thread there and then start stitching from the next notch and just travel up the seam maybe 2 or 3 centimeters, an inch, and back tack there. So we're just going to create an area for our thumb to be able to go through. I'm not going to start at the hemline there, I'm just going to start maybe an inch up. So this is a 1/4 inch, 6 mils away from the raw edge, just on the edge of your overlocking line. Okay, right, so what that does is it gives us a nice area to be able to complete our thumb hole. It gives us a nice finish. So what we're going to do now is open that up. We'll worry about these leftover overlocking threads shortly. So there's 2 ways of completing the opening of this. Either you can just back tack across either end of the opening, or you can stitch up, across and down in a rectangle shape. Now that's what I like to do. You might find it easier to press this into place first. So what we're going to do, and you just need to make sure, because we've only got a 6 mil 1/4 inch seam allowance there, we just want to make sure that we're stitching to hold that in. So you need to make sure it's just short of 6 mils. So I'm going to start there, a couple of stitches up. I'm going to go up and just past the end, maybe 1 stitch past the end. I'm going to pivot, and I'm just going to make sure the other side is turned under as well. This can be where the iron comes in handy. Okay, so when that's in the correct place, just stitch across the same distance, and we're going to turn and pivot, making sure that's still correct. Stitch down, maybe 1 more stitch, turn and pivot. And I'm back at my starting point, and I'm going to back tack. Okay, so what that has done is given us a nice opening for our thumb to come through. So go ahead and repeat that for the other sleeve. So now if you have a cover seamer or a twin needle, turn that up at the hem notch and stitch that into place. If you don't, what I'm going to do is run a double line of stitching on top of our overlocking. So I'm just going to turn that at the notch position and turn under my overlocking, just so that overlocking end is tucked within the seam. And I'm going to stitch that into position. Now bear in mind, if you do use a plain stitch on a sewing machine, your garment won't have as much give as if you had used a cover seamer. The twin needle as well, because of the zigzag underneath, will give you a lot more stretch. So that's up to you. So I'm going to stitch this starting at the side seam, the underarm position. Just going to make sure that's correct, and we're going to stitch a line directly through the overlocking line. And remember to back tack to secure that. So because I want my stitching to look like a cover seamer, I'm just going to run a second line of stitching parallel to the first on the fold side at foot width, which is approximately 6mm, 1/4 of an inch. Whatever width you want to use is fine, as long as it's consistent. Okay, so go ahead now and repeat that for the other sleeve hem, and just do some quality control work, just trim off any stray threads, and then we can start working on the bands. So we have 3 band pieces. These two are the same length, the difference is the width. So the wider one is the hem band, the narrower one is the neck band, and then we have a very long pair, so one's been cut like this and one's been cut like that, of centre front bands. So we're going to start working with the hem band piece. So take your band piece and fold it so that wrong sides are together and right sides are out. Then come to the hem area of your garment, the lower edge, and we're going to match the band into place. Along the top of the band you will see a notch here. Now that notch needs to match to the side seam here, and this raw edge here will match to the outside of the garment. So making sure we have right sides together, we're going to put this into place. So the 2 notches there will match to the side seam here. And then these 3 edges will sit directly butted up at the side seam. Then when we come along towards the centre back of our garment, there will be a notch in the centre. And then that notch will match to the centre notch in our band. And then everything is just mirrored from there on in. Come to the other side and match the other notches. And all 3 layers will be on top of each other at the other side. And so once you've got everything pinned into place, go ahead and overlock it. The main thing to make sure of is that you don't stretch it too much as you sew. The other thing is just make sure it's nice and even. And that your beginning and end points are perfect. look at the centre front piece, it's a long rectangle with notches on it. Come to the end with the notch closest to it. So this is the bottom, this is the hem of our garment, the hem area. So what we need to do is take one of the hemband pieces, come to the area that's closest to the hemline notch, turn this, or fold it, sorry, so that we have right sides together, and overlock through the short edge. Now be really careful about matching on this piece. And then take the other hemband piece and do exactly the same thing. Here's the end with the notch closest to it. Fold it so that it is right sides together. And overlock that to secure it. And then turn it so that wrong sides are together and right sides are out. So we're going to start and overlock the centre front band to our garment. So go ahead and take the body of your garment and we're going to start matching that in. Take the band piece that you've just bagged out and find that notch closest to the end we've just sewn with our overlocker. So that notch there is going to sit on top of the seam here. Now as you can see, I haven't quite stretched that to the edge, so when I overlock I'm going to need to trim off some of the fabric so we have a nice smooth transition there. So that is not ideal, but anyway, so that notch there matches to the seam there, and then this bag out area here needs to sit exactly on the fold of the hemband. So you need to be very careful when you start your overlocking that we end up with a seamless transition at the lower edge like that. So as we go up the side of the front, you're going to see notches. So it's just a matter now of matching those notches to our centre front band very carefully to make sure everything fits properly. So as we approach this upper edge, the raw edges of the band will match exactly at the upper edge. So we want it all to be sitting perfectly. And just remember, this is right sides together, so we've got the right side of the front to the right side of the band. So when you're ready, go ahead and overlock that into position. Now this is when I said that the overlocking colour is going to be very careful. The overlocking colour you need to choose very carefully, because as we continue around the neckband area, this garment may swing open, so you will see the overlocking. So you need to be very careful with the colour you chose. So for this, I'm going to start overlocking from the bottom, because it's more important to me that I get my bottom area matched perfectly, the hem area. So I'm just going to make doubly sure that that's all sitting perfectly like that. And I want to leave enough of a tail when I start overlocking that I can stitch that in later and tidy that edge up. Okay, so go ahead and repeat that for the band on the other side, and when you've finished, go and give your garment a really good press with your iron. So now we're going to sew on the neckband. Take the neck piece, fold it right sides together, and overlock the short end. And come to the other end and do exactly the same thing, being really careful not to twist it. So right sides together. And now turn that through so that wrong sides are together and right sides are out. Take your garment and place it so that the right side is up. Then take the neck piece and place it on top. The first point we need to look for is the double notch right in the center of the neckband. That's going to match the double notch right in the center of the back yoke. You'll know it's in the right place because it's directly above the pleat we created. Now the easiest thing I find to do is to come down the side on one side and match the next notch to the shoulder seam. Then go back to the center, go to the other side and match the other notch to the other shoulder seam. And then the last point we need to match is the very beginning. So this folded edge here needs to go right across to the folded edge here. On your way down you'll see one more notch, and that will match to the notch at the front here, halfway between the shoulder and that folded edge. Now when you're overlocking this down, it's really important that this center front seam faces towards the body of the garment. Now the reason for this is to do with the overlocking colour. If your overlocking sits this way, what's going to happen is you're going to see the transition of the colour here to here. So when you press that, or go ahead and press that so that that seam faces in, and now that's assuming that you've chosen the same colour of the band as your overlocking colour. So press that down, match all those notches and your beginning points, and then overlock that together. Now this seam will more than likely be seen when you wear this garment. The neckline's designed to fall open, so you need to be really careful when you overlock this that you only do it once and you do it right, so take your time. So go ahead and pin the opposite side into place. So we have one more notch to match across the front of the neckline. And then that fold will come all the way out to the edge here. And sorry, I forgot to mention it before, you will see a notch to match to that seam there. And if you need to, pin down here to make sure that that seam on this side faces towards the body of the garment. I'm going to put a pin down here facing this way just to hold that seam the correct way. So when you're ready, go ahead and overlock that into place. So the very last step in our process is to tidy up these overlocking edge bits. So there's various ways you can tidy this overlocking up. I'm simply going to trim that back to around about 1 inch, 2 or 3 centimeters. And what I'm going to do is just roll that over the top towards where the seam has been pressed. And I'm just going to stitch that down on top of the overlocking just to hide it in place. Because of the way we've pressed the garment, that should sit on the inside and hide it quite nicely. So go ahead and complete that tidy up for all your overlocked edges. So you'll have a couple at the hem and a couple at the neckband centre front to finish off. And go ahead and trim any threads and do some quality control work. So thanks for joining me with this sew along video. I hope you enjoyed it, and really appreciate all the feedback I'm getting. I look forward to you joining me for my next sew along video soon.